I haven't done a gay book review in quite some time, but it's time for a new one. This one is on the meaning of Mariah Carey. I had to do this. I had to not only read this book, but talk to you guys about it. And at first I was like, I don't know if I can relate this to my channel, because it's very important for me with this channel to be consistent and to never sway from the original themes of this channel. You know, with this channel, everything revolves around gay stories, gay topics, LGBT topics. So I only like to pull from pop culture references and current events if I can relate it to that. And somebody had actually commented on one of my previous videos saying, are you going to do like a book review video about this? And I had said only if I can tie it into the themes of this channel, and I can certainly do that because reading it, I related to a lot of things and I wanted to share it with you guys. So first off, the name of the book is The Meaning of Mariah Carey. As soon as I found out that she had an autobiography, I knew I was going to read it, but I was really turned off by the name of the book because it, you know, you can think of so many clever names based on her incredible success, and she also has professionally with her music always had a knack for picking one-word monikers for albums, for song titles that are just kind of instantly eligible for classic or like iconic status, right? Like she had an album called Emotions, Daydream, Butterfly. You know, she has all these famous songs like Fantasy, Dream Lover. They're just like easy to remember, one word. And so not only is it verbose, but it just sounds very, I guess, narcissistic. And then, you know, it's like a photo shoot here, her name's here again. So I'm sure a lot of you guys from the start of this video, from the moment that I showed the cover, are like, yeah, whatever. But I have to say, after finishing the book, I understand why she named it this. I still think they could have gone with something a bit less, maybe self-absorbed, but it really is a story of resilience, and that is supposed to be the meaning of Mariah Carey, even though she never says, this is what the meaning of who I really am is. Throughout the story, it's woven into it, these themes of faith and perseverance and resilience. I did see an interview where she mentioned that the back cover was what she originally wanted the front to be, the actual cover. And she said this before with albums too, where the album cover ended up being very like diva-ish. And she would say like, oh, what I really wanted to do was, you know, use this childhood picture or whatever. And so I'm a little disappointed that she seems to listen to whoever's telling her to just go big and go diva-ish. Because it's like she's had all this success. At this point, if she can't do what she wants to do, who else can do it, right? Like who else has the authority to actually make artistic decisions based on what their instincts and what they want to do if Mariah Carey can't do it, right? So I do think this would have been more powerful, especially because she talks about the story behind this picture. And the covers, I keep harping on the covers, because the front and the back cover, because it really is such a great example of Mariah Carey's image, in that you look at it and it seems very self-absorbed, but there's like nuances in it that are very important to her story and this whole idea of like the meaning of Mariah Carey. So perfect example, if you look closely and carefully, so, you know, here's her hair and it trails off and it connects to her hair on purpose. You can tell like literally the strands of hair connect to the front. So this whole idea is like this little girl is still very much inside of her, very much is still a part of her story. And, you know, the irony is not lost on me, or not the irony, I guess it was probably purposely done, but they're connected through hair, and hair becomes a part of some of the vignettes in the book, because being, you know, not just a woman, but being a woman of color, hair is such an important symbol of like worth and value, and there's like, you know, colorism with that and racism, and it's all in the book. So it's interesting, and I think it's unfortunate that through just looking at the front cover, it probably loses a potential audience that's like, oh, I don't want to read this. But yet, like, if you look closely, there's already these nuances that are, I think, part of a really fascinating story, which is her life story. And the thing is, a lot of us who have followed her career or her life story through interviews and stuff, this book won't be a surprise to those of us who know kind of the basics of her life story. She's had a pretty tragic life story, but an incredible life story to come from where she came from, to have that resilience and to succeed in such meteoric ways, in such iconic ways, and to have the talent that she has despite growing up with all these complexes and all these tumultuous times, particularly from her childhood. What I'm mentioning right now, I saw echoed in a Wendy Williams interview, or not interview, a Wendy Williams just on her TV show during Hot Topics, where she just kind of talks to the camera about random pop culture things. She said, I'm not going to read the book because I already know her story. I already know about the tragic childhood and that she overcame all these things, that she had this abusive marriage. And I thought it was a little tone deaf for Wendy Williams to say that, to be like, I already know this story. But after reading the book, she was right. I mean, there were a lot of the details. I didn't know all the details. But Wendy Williams was right that the foundation of it, for people who really care to know, they already know the incredible life story of Mariah Carey. But I do think the average person doesn't know the basics of her life story. The thing is, like I said, I don't know that the average person who's not interested, who's not really a fan, who doesn't know her life story, I don't know that they would care enough to pick up the book. So it's interesting, because I think the average person who will go for a book like this already kind of knows enough about her to be fascinated. I don't know that this will appeal to the average person, even though it really should, because it is such an incredible life story. I don't know many people who have... I haven't heard of many life stories that are comparable to Mariah Carey's. I think the closest I can think of is Oprah Winfrey's, because she also basically came from nothing, from a troubled childhood, and she should have been a statistic, and somehow she became, I want to say the world's only female black billionaire. Obviously, money's not everything, but just the idea that somebody could come from where she came from, growing up with an outhouse, to becoming what she ended up becoming, this media mogul with her own network and all the influence she's had on the world through her show, through her charity work. It's a similar story in terms of being a story about following a path, being driven down a path of like feeling like you need to be validated by your success and creating a huge legacy. So anyway, now that I've gone into this whole preface, what I really wanted to get to for this gay book review is that she really did have this childhood as not only growing up a mixed girl, a biracial girl, multiracial girl, but also just coming from a very dysfunctional family. She dealt with a lot of isolation growing up, a lot of turmoil. She talks often about feeling like an outsider and not really having anybody to talk to. And also what I thought was very poignant was not having the vocabulary, like not knowing how to express what she was really feeling because there was no reference. There was no reference, and I think as a gay person, I very much relate to that idea of like growing up feeling uncomfortable and certain situations that were basically bullying. I hate to use that word because it's such like a buzzword, like, oh, I was bullied. But I think worse than bullying is like the mental effect, the psychological effect of feeling so isolated from other people and not knowing how to express it, and also if it's like appropriate to express it. In this case, with family, right? There's so much shame around, at least for me, there was so much shame around growing up gay and like, can I talk about this? I guess I can, it's too taboo. And so internalizing all these things. And she talks about that very same thing, but coming from a perspective of her growing up marginalized as this girl who's like too white for the black kids, but too black or too ethnic for the white kids, and being in this weird limbo zone and not having anybody to talk to, particularly because she mostly grew up with her mother who was white. The way the book is written is really interesting because it's actually very Mariah-ish in that certain parts are very well written, really poetic, really elegant. The imagery that she brought out, for example, whenever she talks about Tommy Mottola, her first husband, she compares him to humidity. And there's a few other people, her siblings, she also compares to like weather phenomenon, like knowing that a storm is coming, you can feel the humidity in the air. And as somebody who knows her like deep cuts, her songs that are more poetic, it's very much comparable to that. So I know that that is her, as opposed to, you know, the editor or the publishing house, or I guess Michaela Angela Davis, who she wrote it with, because it sounds very Mariah-ish in the way, like very similar to how she writes her songs. And then in other parts of the book, she writes very, very casually, as if you're just like driving with her in the car and she's telling you this story casually to a friend. Those parts I wish had been more tidy, more professional, because it would have been more consistent for the whole book to be in that sort of elegant, well-written prose, I guess. At the same time, if she had done that, people probably would think that she had very little to do with the writing, and that it was Michaela Angela Davis who did all the writing. So it really felt to me that it was Mariah's voice, which is ideal, of course, for an autobiography. But as we know, most celebrities who write an autobiography, they have a ghostwriter. And I appreciate that she gave the name of the co-writer, as opposed to doing what a lot of celebrities do, which is just not mention that there's a ghostwriter and pretend that they wrote the whole thing. So it did feel earnest to me, coming from her voice. I also appreciated that she laced some of the more serious moments with humor and kind of like a flippant attitude, like, oh, what the fuck? Like, there's a lot of cursing actually in the book, and that felt real, that felt authentic. But again, it felt a little eerie to go from serious, really well-written, poetic, to suddenly casual, like, I don't know, you're drunk together at 3 a.m. and she's telling you this crazy story. But that's real life, I guess, right? Like, real life is, we all have moments where we, I guess, code switch from coming off more professional and more serious and more charming and elegant, and then just being like, you know, whatever, I'm gonna say what I want to say without a filter. Overall, it is a really moving story. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, I don't want to give anything away, but there are things that are shocking from her childhood, particularly when it comes to dysfunction she grew up around in her home, abuse from her family, psychologically, verbally, and just the stuff that she dealt with because of her race. Like, looking at a woman like this, looking at Mariah Carey, everything she's accomplished, you would never think that somebody like this has been through all of that. So I think it's a very important story to tell. My only real frustration with the book was that I sensed very little accountability from her. I think there were 2 or 3 moments where she said, I screwed up there, I was too cruel to XYZ person. But most of the book did feel to me like she was blaming a lot of people around her and what they had done to her and what they made her feel. And I think that that's valid. I think she definitely has been screwed over by a lot of people. I think this is a woman who clearly has trust issues, and rightfully so, from people exploiting her even before the fame. But there were parts where I kind of had to stop and be like, wait, this feels kind of hypocritical. For example, there's a part where she talks about how her brother had loaned her $5,000 for her first professional demo, and how because of that, their whole adult life, he has felt entitled to basically living off of her fortune because of those $5,000. And she says, look, I paid him those $5,000 and then some. Like, I've taken care of him in so many ways. You know, at what point do I no longer owe you my life and my fortune? And I think, you know, totally valid. But then literally pages later, she talks about her mom calling the cops on her in her house, in her mother's house that Mariah Carey had paid for. And Mariah makes sure this is mentioned multiple times, that really it's her house because she paid for it. And in my head, I'm thinking, pages ago, you were talking about how it's not cool for your brother to feel entitled to your fortune because of loaning you $5,000 when you were a teenager. This is the same kind of idea. This is your mother's house. Let her have her house. Don't feel like, I mean, that must be really hurtful to her, even though her mother made a lot of mistakes. It's clear in the book. I was like, that's kind of screwed up to keep harping how this is really your house that you're being kicked out of. No, it's your mother's house that you gifted her. And yes, it's pretty ironic that you would get kicked out of a house that you paid for and get dragged off by cops. But to me, it felt like she quickly goes into the mode of victimhood as opposed to coming from a place of humility. That being said, there's a lot of parts of the book where she does come from a place of humility. And what I've seen from her in interviews is that she does seem genuinely humble, way more than the average person who has that kind of success. Some of the idols she talks about in this book, Prince, Whitney Houston, I have always found to be very unlikable and uncharming when I've seen them, talk in interviews. Every time I've seen an interview of theirs, they just seem very disconnected, defensive, and just not humble. And Mariah Carey has always come off very warm to me. Like in the more serious interviews, she just seems like a very real person who's been through it. So there are parts of this book where definitely that is channeled. But with the whole part of getting kicked out of her mom's house, she talks about how her record label after that was basically trying to get rid of her because they felt she was too unstable. And she frames it as like they were just unprofessional, didn't know how to work with somebody like me. And I do think that must have been a part of it. But you can't tell me that a big record label who's had artists like Janet Jackson is going to pay her what I believe, I want to say it was like $80 million or $100 million, like something insane. You can't tell me that they would want to get rid of her after that when she had the top selling single of that year just because she's unstable. And it's ironic that accountability for me kept coming up as something that I was like, Mariah, because so much of the book is devoted to her family's lack of accountability, her ex-husband, Tommy Mottola's lack of accountability. So it was interesting to me that she could see that in other people, but didn't necessarily take ownership herself. She also doesn't mention her diagnosis of bipolarity at all, which I thought was so strange because it was such a big story a year or two ago when she did like a huge magazine interview about it. To me, that seems like pivotal as part of her story of realizing why she has had such issues with sleep her whole life. The fact that she clearly had a manic episode when she got kicked out of her mom's house after the whole glitter drama. I've seen her say in an interview that she feels that diagnosis could happen to anybody under those circumstances of being sleep deprived, and I completely agree with her. Anytime I'm sleep deprived, I'm so much more emotional, so much more moody, that I can only imagine if she had been overworked for this long, for this many years, and then she had a week where she says she slept like no more than 2 hours every night that week. I can completely understand how that could drive anybody bonkers and like emotionally unstable. But I thought it was bizarre that she didn't even discuss, even like mention that diagnosis. So again, it's like in certain parts I felt like there was a lack of self-awareness and self-reflection. Of course, since it's a memoir, it focuses on her personal life, which is fine. There are, details that I had never known about before, like specific stories from her childhood that explain more of why she is the way she is today. But I did wish there was more focus on the music and her talent. Like I wish she talked about her voice more, like the evolution of her voice, how it sounds very different than it used to, but how her musicality has remained from start to finish, how she's still been a songwriter throughout it all. I also wish that certain songs that mean a lot to her, she had talked more about. She did that with some songs, mostly songs from the Butterfly album. She talked about the true story behind, I think, 3 of them. 3 that are very well known among her fans. There are certain songs that I just expected her to talk about because they're fan favorites, or even she has mentioned that they're favorites of hers, like Underneath the Stars. She references the lyrics at one point, but I was always really curious what the inspiration for that song was because it sounds very autobiographical, I guess, but maybe it was just she found the lyrics that matched the melody and it didn't have more meaning beyond that. I don't know. But other songs like that, or 4th of July, or she has a song called I Am Free. There's different songs from her career that I just expected her to talk about. Of course, there's only so much you can fit in this book. I'm sure there's parts that she scrapped because she just didn't want the book to be even longer than it already is. It's almost 350 pages. But I do wish there had been more of a focus on the talent part of her career as opposed to like the personal life drama attached to the career. But anyway, at the end of the day, it really is a beautiful story of resilience and perseverance and getting back up and pursuing her dreams and having like the might and the grit to keep going, which I think is relatable for people, any minority background, like I said, whether you're gay, whether you're black, whether you're mixed, whether you grew up poor, whether you have a disability. And I think anybody who relates to that message, even if they're not part of a minority group, if they feel like they've had a lot of hurdles in life and trauma or troubles. It's a beautiful story, I think, of survival and surviving past those hurdles. So I wanted to finish it up by reading my favorite part, which was the epilogue, which is only like a little bit more than a page, but I want to read the parts that I thought were most powerful from this epilogue for you guys. So it starts, "In the middle of a violent storm, very young, I was given a glimpse of God's vision for me. As a child awakened to my dream, I believed with my entire being in what I was meant to do and who I was meant to be, long before anyone else did. And holding on to that belief required everything I had. Along the way, I was given signs of hope, but mostly I faced chaos and calamity, heartbreaks and brutal betrayals to derail me. Some almost killed me, or worse, almost killed my spirit. The toughest truth was that the people I loved the most hurt me the most. The ones closest to me were the ones who came closest to stripping me of my dreams. If I've learned anything in this life worth sharing, it is protect your dreams. Even in the face of disadvantages and dysfunction, you can't let anybody define, control, or take away your vision of your life. In the end and in the beginning, it's all about faith for me. I can't define it, but it has defined me." I thought that was a beautiful ending to her story, to this book. And I love that line about protecting your dreams. I thought that it's like so simple, but so poignant. And again, there are different parts of the book where I had that moment again of feeling like, wow, that is so simple but vivid, and it pierces, your soul, and you understand, you relate to it on like a soul level. So that is my 2 cents and then some. This was a long ass video of this book. If any of you have read it, I would love to hear your feedback. I definitely recommend it, again, just because as a life story, it's fascinating, and I think it's always good for people to see that someone is multidimensional and more than just the image of Mariah Carey. And she even says that in the book. She quotes herself, her name. She's like, the branding, the image of Mariah Carey, there's so much more to it than just that. There's a life force behind it. There's a story. There's adventures. There's highs. There's lows. There's everything. So if you guys have read it or plan to read it, would love to get your feedback.